Many people assume fear appears as anxiety. They imagine fear as panic, nervousness, or obvious distress. But most fear is far more subtle than that. It rarely announces itself as fear. It arrives disguised as practicality, as caution, as common sense, as realism. It sounds like, that's probably not for me. Maybe later. I need to figure a few things out first. It isn't the right time. I should wait until I'm more prepared. The voice feels reasonable. In fact, it often feels responsible. And because it feels reasonable, we rarely question it. Most of the beliefs that shape our lives never announce themselves as beliefs. They do not appear as clear statements that say, "You can't do this," or "This is impossible." Instead, they quietly determine what feels possible. They shape what attracts our attention. They shape what we dismiss. They shape what we consider realistic before we have even explored it. And because these patterns operate below conscious awareness, they often feel like simple truth. They feel like who we are. They feel like how life is. But what if some of what feels like reality is actually filtering? What if some of the limits you experience are not limitations in reality itself, but limitations in what your nervous system allows you to perceive? This is one of the ways subconscious beliefs reveal themselves, not through argument, not through resistance, but through omission. The most powerful limitations in your life may not be the ones you can see. They may be the possibilities that never even make it onto the table. The opportunities that disappear before they are considered. The directions that never feel available. The versions of yourself that seem unrealistic before they are ever explored. And until those invisible boundaries become visible, they continue shaping the life you experience without ever appearing to be there. One of the most important things to understand about fear is that it rarely argues. Most people imagine fear as an internal voice saying, "Wait, don't do that. That's dangerous. Turn back." But fear is usually far more sophisticated than that. It doesn't stop possibilities through confrontation. It removes them from perception. Certain paths never seem realistic. Certain opportunities never seem available. Certain futures never feel like yours. Not because they are impossible. Not because they are wrong, but because the nervous system quietly filters them out before conscious consideration ever begins. This is why subconscious beliefs can be so difficult to identify. They do not feel like limitations. They feel like reality. The mind assumes it is seeing the world objectively. In truth, it is often seeing a version of reality that has already been filtered through layers of conditioning, experience, and protective prediction. At the center of this process is a simple question that the nervous system is constantly asking: can I survive this? Notice what it is not asking. It is not asking, do I want this? Would this make me happy? Would this help me grow? Before opportunity is evaluated, the nervous system evaluates something else entirely: safety, belonging, identity, stability, the possibility of overwhelm. The system is constantly attempting to predict whether what is being approached can be metabolized without rupture. And it does this automatically, long before conscious thought enters the picture. This explains a pattern many people experience but struggle to understand. A person may sincerely want more money, more visibility, more intimacy, more leadership, more purpose. The desire is real, the intention is genuine, yet every time life begins moving in that direction, something happens. The body tightens, energy contracts, urgency appears, doubt enters. And almost immediately a story arrives. Not now. I'm not ready. I need to work on myself first. Something else needs to be resolved before I can do that. The content of the story often sounds reasonable. Sometimes it even sounds wise. But the story itself is rarely the most important thing. The timing is. Why does the explanation arrive precisely when life begins moving closer? Why does the hesitation appear exactly at the threshold of expansion? Because the function of the story is not necessarily accuracy. Its function is protection. The nervous system senses a change in territory, a movement towards something larger, more visible, more uncertain, or more demanding than what has been held before. And before conscious awareness can fully engage, the system attempts to restore familiarity. Not because growth is wrong, not because success is dangerous, but because the nervous system trusts what it has survived more than what it has not yet experienced. This is the hidden pattern beneath much of human limitation. Fear does not usually stop life by saying no. It stops life by quietly making certain possibilities disappear before they are ever seriously considered. When fear operates below awareness, something important begins to happen. Possibility narrows, not because reality becomes smaller, because perception becomes smaller. Fear does not remove options from life, it removes options from awareness. This is what we might call option blindness. Option blindness occurs when certain pathways never register as viable, even when they are directly available. The opportunity exists, the possibility exists, the door is present, but the nervous system never fully recognizes it as a door. Instead, it is dismissed before it is seriously considered. Sometimes this happens so quickly that we do not even notice it. An idea appears and disappears almost immediately. A possibility arises and is instantly categorized as unrealistic. A direction emerges and is dismissed before genuine exploration can occur. The mind then creates explanations to justify the dismissal. That would never work. That's not practical. People don't succeed that way. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too late. The explanations feel logical, but often they are arriving after the filtering has already occurred. The conclusion is not creating the limitation. The limitation is creating the conclusion. Beneath option blindness lies something even deeper: identity. People often believe they are limited by circumstances. Sometimes they are, but more often, they are limited by who they believe themselves to be. Identity creates invisible boundaries around possibility. The statements may sound familiar. I'm not a business person. I'm not a leader. I'm not creative. I'm not good with money. I'm not the type of person who does that. People like me don't live that way. These identities rarely feel restrictive. They feel factual. They feel accurate. They feel like descriptions of reality. But they are often descriptions of a self-structure that has become familiar. Over time, these identities begin functioning like invisible fences. The possibilities outside those fences no longer feel available, not because they are impossible, but because they no longer feel compatible with who we believe ourselves to be. This helps explain why growth often feels uncomfortable. Most people assume growth is about acquiring something new, more success, more confidence, more money, more opportunity. But growth requires something far more significant. Growth requires becoming someone new. The version of you who can hold greater responsibility is not identical to the version of you who cannot. The version of you who can sustain healthy intimacy is not identical to the version of you who avoids vulnerability. The version of you who can comfortably receive visibility is not identical to the version that hides. The nervous system senses these identity shifts immediately, and this is where fear often appears. Not because the opportunity itself is dangerous, but because the identity attached to that opportunity is unfamiliar. The system is not simply evaluating the external change, it is evaluating the internal reorganization that the change requires. And unfamiliar identities often feel threatening before they feel natural. This also explains one of the most frustrating experiences people encounter: the repetition pattern. Different circumstances, same outcome, different relationships, same dynamic, different job, same frustration, different strategy, same financial ceiling. People often assume they have encountered bad luck, or difficult circumstances, or unfortunate timing. Sometimes that is true, but often something deeper is occurring. Reality continues responding to what is actually being held below awareness. The conscious mind may want expansion. The subconscious system may still be organized around protection. And until those deeper structures become visible, life tends to circle back toward familiar territory. Not because reality is working against you, not because you are sabotaging yourself, but because the nervous system is remaining loyal to an identity it still believes is necessary for survival. What repeats is often not circumstance. What repeats is organization. And until that organization changes, the same patterns can continue appearing in different forms. At this point, a natural question begins to emerge. If fear is shaping perception, limiting possibility, and creating repetition, then how do we overcome it? Most people immediately move toward the same conclusion. They assume fear is the problem. They assume fear must be defeated, managed, eliminated, transcended. But this is one of the greatest misunderstandings in personal growth. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is not a flaw in the system. Fear is not evidence that something has gone wrong. Fear is protection. More specifically, fear is intelligence operating on previous experience. The nervous system is constantly learning. It remembers where overwhelm occurred. It remembers where support was insufficient. It remembers where pressure exceeded capacity. It remembers where contact became too intense to sustain. From those experiences, predictions are formed, and fear emerges as an attempt to prevent those experiences from repeating. Seen from this perspective, fear is not trying to stop your life, it is trying to preserve your coherence. The problem is not that fear exists. The problem is that fear is often operating on information that is no longer current. The system continues responding to old conditions even after new capacities have developed. This creates an entirely different orientation. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of fear? A more useful question becomes, what is fear trying to protect? And what would allow it to relax? Notice how different those questions feel. One creates conflict. The other creates curiosity. One treats fear as an obstacle. The other treats fear as information. This shift is important because fear rarely disappears through force. It softens through understanding. It relaxes through experience. It updates through contact with reality. Many people assume fear means they should not proceed, but often fear is communicating something far more nuanced. Fear frequently appears when expansion exceeds perceived capacity. The nervous system senses a movement towards something larger than what it currently trusts itself to hold, and immediately a protective response emerges. The system is not necessarily saying no. It is often saying, not this quickly, or I need more support, or I need more evidence that this is survivable, or I need to learn how to stay present with this level of intensity. This distinction matters because it changes how growth is approached. When fear is treated as resistance, people tend to push harder. They force, override, pressure themselves forward. But when fear is understood as protection, the focus shifts toward capacity, toward pacing, toward creating the conditions that allow expansion to become sustainable. The goal is no longer to overpower the nervous system. The goal is to help it reorganize. And this leads to one of the most important insights in this entire chapter. Fear is not opposed to growth. Fear is opposed to rupture. Fear does not exist to prevent expansion. It exists to prevent expansion from occurring faster than the system can integrate. When this distinction becomes clear, the relationship with fear changes completely. Fear no longer needs to be conquered. It needs to be understood. It becomes less of an adversary and more of a guide. A signal pointing toward the places where growth is occurring faster than trust, the places where capacity is still catching up to possibility. And when fear is met this way, something remarkable begins to happen. What once felt like an obstacle starts revealing its intelligence, and what once felt like limitation starts becoming a doorway into deeper alignment. As we come to the end of this chapter, it may be worth pausing for a moment and considering a different question. Most people spend their lives asking, what am I afraid of? And while that question can be useful, it may not be the deepest one. Perhaps the more revealing question is, what possibilities have quietly disappeared from view? What have you already decided is impossible? What opportunities have been dismissed before they were explored? What future no longer appears available? What conversations have never been started? What risks have never been considered? What desires have been quietly set aside because they no longer seemed realistic? And perhaps most importantly, what version of yourself feels unrealistic before you have even attempted to live it? These questions matter because subconscious beliefs rarely reveal themselves through what we notice. They reveal themselves through what we stop noticing, through what disappears from consideration, through what never reaches conscious awareness in the first place. This is why fear can be so difficult to recognize. Fear rarely narrows possibility through force. It rarely announces itself as a barrier. It rarely says, "You cannot go there." Instead, it works through omission. It quietly edits perception. It removes possibilities before they can be explored. It narrows the field of awareness until limitation feels natural, until contraction feels reasonable, until the familiar feels synonymous with the possible. But something begins to change as awareness grows. The filtering becomes visible, the assumptions become visible, the identities become visible. And as they become visible, possibilities that once seemed impossible begin to appear. Ideas that once felt unrealistic begin to feel available. Directions that once felt closed begin to open. Not because reality suddenly changed, reality was already offering those possibilities. What changed was perception. What changed was the ability to see beyond the limits that fear had quietly constructed. This is one of the reasons awareness is so transformative. It does not create a new reality. It allows us to experience more of the reality that was already here. And as perception expands, possibility expands with it. Not through force, not through positive thinking, not through trying to become someone else, but through seeing more clearly what has been there all along. The limits of your life are often not found in reality itself. They are found in the possibilities fear has quietly taught you not to see.